This is about testing AI, which is now very popular, to check how it would actually perform when it is asked a very simple question in terms of regulatory matters, but it is also a very specific question. So the question we asked AI was, how does the CLP apply to biostimulants? Now we have to understand, or just for a reminder, that the CLP is actually the European regulation on the classification, labeling and packaging 1272/2008 of the European Union. So this regulation actually is about the classification in terms of its hazardous properties and the labeling of chemical substances and mixtures. So the first answer that we got from eAsk AI, that's the tool that we use. It's actually a free of charge website which actually proposes you to ask AI questions and everything you want to know. So that's where we actually ask the question, and then the response starts first by stating something like understanding the CLP in relation to biostimulants. And there it starts with a definition of biostimulants, which is fine. Okay, nothing much to say about that. Then it continues with point 2 on the relevance of CLP. And here already we have the first mistake, because it states the CLP regulation applies to biostimulants when they contain hazardous substances. No, that is actually misleading, because the whole purpose of the CLP is that you perform for every mixture that you have an assessment according or in line with the CLP to identify actually whether it contains hazardous substances. And then in a second step, you will have to determine whether the concentration of that hazardous substances actually leads to a classification for that hazard of the entire mixture. That first sentence is misleading to my view. Then the answer goes on, under this regulation, any product that poses a risk must be classified accordingly. Again, completely wrong wording. That is not true. The CLP is not about risk assessment. It's only about the identification and the labeling of hazards. So these two sentences in terms of the relevance of the CLP, and mind you, that was exactly the purpose of our question. In what sense or how, to what extent the CLP is it actually relevant to biostimulants? And then the answer continues, this means that if a biostimulant contains components that are toxic, corrosive or harmful in any way, it must be labeled with the appropriate hazard symbols and warnings. That last sentence, this means that if a biostimulant contains components that are toxic, corrosive or harmful in any way, that is layman's blah blah. That doesn't mean actually anything and is completely irrelevant in terms of that response. Then the third point about this first start of giving an answer, it's the classification process. There it says the classification process involves evaluating the chemical composition of the biostimulant products. That is correct. It's not about evaluating the chemical composition. It is evaluating whether that mixture, which is the biostimulant, needs to be classified in terms of the CLP. And for that, you need the composition up to 100%. So again, that sentence does not really make sense and does not really reflect reality or what really needs to be done. Then it goes on, manufacturers must assess whether their products meet the criteria for classification under the CLP regulation based on their hazardous properties. Again, this answer is partly true, because it's not only the manufacturers which are responsible for the classification, it could also be the importer or the one placing it on the market. It depends. So the CLP is very specific about who is responsible for the classification of a product, and it is not necessarily only the manufacturer. So you see that that response, that AI, which is supposed to know everything and to read on all the sources it finds on the internet, it does not provide a correct and also not a complete answer to our question. The response from AI on our question, to what extent CLP applies to biostimulants, it goes further by describing labeling requirements, which is indeed it's an important part in the CLP. And there it reads, if a biostimulant is classified as hazardous under the CLP guidelines, it must include specific information on its label regarding its hazards, precautionary measures for safe handling, and first aid instructions. This ensures that users are informed about potential risks associated with the product. That response is kind of okay. Only the last sentence, this ensures that users are informed about potential risk. That is not correct because, as I stated and explained previously, this CLP is not about risks, it's about hazards. And that is not the same. A hazard is an intrinsic property of a substance or a product, whereas the risk is a calculation of that hazard times the exposure. So that is not at all the same thing. So in that respect, I do not really agree with that last sentence. Then continues with impact on market access. That's a funny one because the CLP does not really deal with market access. The response which is given here is compliance with the CLP regulations is crucial for market access within the EU. Products that do not meet these requirements may face restrictions or bans from being sold in EU member states. Yeah, well, actually, indeed, in order to place your product lawfully on the market in the EU, product must be correctly classified and labeled. So yes, if your label is not correct because you did not get the CLP section right on your label, then you might face fines or other consequences. That's correct. So I would 0.5 impact on market access. Yeah, okay, why not? Future developments, I don't know why that is actually also given because that was not our question, but okay, let's just read through it. As awareness of biostimulants grows and their use becomes more widespread in agriculture, yeah, that's true, it is expected that regulatory frameworks like the CLP will evolve to better address these products' unique characteristics while ensuring safety for users and the environment. I'm not so sure about that, and I do not know where they actually got that. I do not think that the CLP will evolve because of biostimulants, because they are usually not very hazardous products, and so I do not know where that comes from. It seems to me like a bit of, filling the void kind of content. The last paragraph then is a summary where it reads, in summary, while biostimulants themselves may not inherently fall under strict classifications like fertilizers or pesticides, that doesn't mean anything, their components can trigger CLP regulations if they pose any hazards. Again, does not make sense. It's not the CLP that triggers any hazards in a product, it's simply, the wording is simply misleading. Therefore, manufacturers must carefully evaluate their products for compliance with these regulations. No, manufacturers or anyone responsible for the classification of their products must always make sure that the products they place on the market have been correctly classified under the CLP. The CLP applies to all mixtures, and whether your mixture then will have to be classified under the CLP will depend on its composition, ultimately, of the components and their concentration in the mixture. That's the bottom line. I hope this was helpful. See you soon.